Welcome to the session about mixed reality capture in the Rift SDK. My name is Dietrich. I'm tech lead for mixed reality capture on Rift. First, I'm going to give an introduction, overview of what mixed reality capture is all about, different stages of the pipeline. And next, we're going to talk about the game engine integration for Unreal and Unity. Finally, we're going to talk about how mixed reality capture works in Medium engine. Here's kind of an overview of one example setup you might use for mixed reality. I should say the point of mixed reality is to try to give somebody who's not in VR a sense for what it's like to be in VR. How many of you in the audience have seen a first-person capture of VR? How many of you guys have seen a mixed reality trailer capture? Okay, so most of you. So the great thing about a first-person capture in VR is it's always available. You can always grab the left or right eye, undistort it, and record it and share it with others. The downside is sometimes the head movement of the user is sort of too much for a third person to understand what's going on. So one way to prevent that is to have a third-person perspective of the user in VR. The downside of that is that if it's just in the person's room, it doesn't give a real sense of what the VR experience is about. So mixed reality is kind of trying to achieve the best of both worlds, to show someone the virtual world, but also show the subject in a way that's understandable to an audience. So in this diagram at the bottom, we have a camera, which could be a standard web camera or a DSLR or a Z stereo depth camera. And rigidly attached to it is what we call the VR object. This is a third touch controller that you put special firmware on, so it's identified as the VR object. What that allows us to do is to track the real camera in tracking space. That allows you to have dynamic camera angles. That's very important to help frame not only the person playing VR, but what it is they're looking at or interacting with. You'll also notice we have 3 sensors in this picture. You can do mixed reality capture with only 2 sensors, but we highly recommend 3 or 4 because not only do you have to track the HMD and the touch of the user, but you also have to track the third touch of the camera. And so as much tracking volume as possible really helps give the camera space to move around and still be tracked well. You'll also notice at the top there's the bright green, that's the green screen. That helps sort of identify the foreground of the person playing with the background. And that can be removed so that we can composite the person into the virtual world. So first-person captures are kind of the standard way to market VR today. Here's an example of Dead and Buried. So it looks pretty good, but it's not really that different from just a first-person game. It's not really clear to someone watching this that this is a VR experience. So instead, we can use mixed reality to give someone a sense for what it's like to be in the game world.
It was an era when the law was non-existent, where you lived by your wits and survived by luck. But the time always came to when you'd have to be dead and buried.
As you can see, we had a lot of dynamic camera angles in there, and we were able to take the live person wearing the Rift and match that up with the virtual guns in the person's hand. So mixed reality capture is actually supported in the currently shipping Rift SDK. It's been there since 1.18. The current implementation does require some third-party software to get working. You can do it either with your native app or with an Unreal or Unity-enabled game. Currently, mixed reality capture is an app-level feature. Each app has to specifically write code for it. And that won't change going forward, but it will become more automatic in the future. Our plan is that mixed reality capture will actually be a system level feature. So you guys saw Dash yesterday. That's going to be the way you control your VR experience. The vision is to have mixed reality capture control within Dash. So the user controls when it's on or off. And so they could turn it on while in Dash or home, and then launch a game, stream that, record that, what have you, and then switch applications seamlessly. And there will still be support for third-party software going forward, but it won't be strictly required. For the sort of standard use case that we envision, it'll be automatic. Like you'll be able to live stream your mixed reality session to Facebook Live, for instance. So now I'm going to walk through the different stages of the mixed reality capture pipeline. There's sort of 3 categories here, and they're color-coded. Green is current native support. So we have our camera calibration tool. Blue is either the native game engine or Unreal or Unity plugin has to implement this. And then the orange is our future native support. So the first step is camera calibration. When we have a real-world camera and real-world coordinates, and then we have our tracking space coordinates for the HMD and the touch, we need to find a correspondence between the real world and the tracking space. So the camera calibration tool allows you to do this. The tool ships with every single Rift installation. It's not just in the SDK, it's actually end user available. The first step is to capture the intrinsics of the camera. Here's a shot of me using the tool. Basically, you print out a checkerboard, you attach it to something rigid like cardboard, and then you hold it up in different positions to give the tool a chance to identify the features of the camera, such as the lens distortion, field of view, and pixel resolution. Next step is the extrinsics calibration. This is where you hold up the HMD, as you can see on the right, and you try to match the center of the HMD with the cross. And you do that a few times, and what that does is it helps us understand where the camera is in tracking space. So now we have a correspondence between the camera's field of view and where it's pointing, and then tracking space. Then on the left, you see me holding up touch controllers, and overlaid on top of the real touch controllers are the black virtual controllers. And what this lets you do is see how the latency works. So as you move your hand, if they don't track you and they seem to be delayed, then you can adjust the latency slider in real time until they match up. So the second step is the actual camera itself. I should say the first step is something that hopefully the user only does once or infrequently. And this next one is sort of the entire loop. So here, the RGB camera takes a photograph and then sends it to the computer, currently over USB. It'll capture color. If you have a depth camera like the Z, you'll get depth at this point also. If you do have a Z, you've already got depth. If you don't, what we can do is apply a green screen filter, and then we take the result of that and turn that into a depth value. This way, the application only has to handle depth compositing. It doesn't have to have a special path for green screen versus depth. Next, the application gets the pose of the real camera and creates a virtual camera that matches that same position and orientation. And the game takes a snapshot of the virtual camera, or from the virtual camera's pose. Finally, we have the user with depth applied to the user. So we have the depth of the user, and then we also have the depth of the scene that the game just rendered, and the game combines them together. Next, the game takes this compositive color and depth and does whatever normal rendering it would do. It can do lighting, you can apply shadows to or from the person into the virtual scene, or taking light from the scene. Then you apply your alpha as normal, then any sort of GUI elements you want in the mixed reality stream. For instance, you might have the character's name or score, etc. Finally, once the scene is fully composited, you output it to a mirror window. This can currently be picked up by software such as OBS or various other capturing programs, or you could stream it out or record it to a video. In the future, this will be natively supported, so we'll be able to directly take your game's output without having to go through a mirror window and stream it to Facebook Live, for instance. And here is a picture of our mount that we used to create that dead and buried shoot. It's a way to attach a touch controller to a camera rigidly, and we'll have files available for you guys to print your own. Okay, John? Thank you.
Thank you, Sim. Hi, everyone. My name is Xiang. Thanks, Sim, for introducing us about the overall pipeline of the mixed reality capture. I'm going to present you some important features and concepts. They will be very useful for you to do the capture with game engines. First of all, let me introduce myself. I have been developing game engines for more than 15 years. Here are some of the games I have developed. I'm currently at Oculus SDK team, working on game engine integrations. Here are the features I'm going to talk about today. Composition method is about how the camera input is composited into the virtual world. Virtual green screen is a technique to reduce the necessary green screen coverage. It also adds more freedom to the camera movement. Dynamic relighting is about using the in-game lights to lit the camera frame. Camera latency synchronization is very important. We need to synchronize the latency between the rendering and the game to make perfect capture. How many of you are using Unity Engine? Please raise your hand. And how many are using Unreal Engine? It seems most of us are using one of them. With the Oculus plugins, we support all those features in both engines. If you are using your own engine, you could easily adopt them. The concepts are all the same. Let's talk about the different composition modes. We support 3 different composition modes: the direct composition, the external composition, and the sandwich composition. Firstly, let's take a look at the direct composition. Conceptually, the direct composition is very simple. It takes the camera frame and places that inside the VR world directly. You will find this method makes the development very easy. You could always check the final composited image in the game window at real time. It also supports virtual green screen and supports applying the in-game lights to lit the camera image. We will discuss those features very soon. And because the camera frame is just another transparent object, which sorts together with all the other transparent objects, the blending result would be correct in most of the situations. We are currently supporting web cameras and Z camera, but there could be some other camera devices, especially some professional ones that we don't support. And we only have built-in the Chroma Keying filter. The camera device usually has a much higher latency than the game rendering. So it makes the synchronization problem very significant in the direct composition mode. We will discuss some solutions afterwards. And we also have the external composition. The external composition mode splits the VR world to the foreground and the background, and output them. User will use an external application to composite them with the camera frame, and output the final composited image. The most benefit of this method is flexible. The composition software on market usually support a wide range of camera devices and filters. and provide many other useful functionalities. Sorry. Let me get it back. Okay, direct composition. Sorry. It also supports image-based camera synchronization, for example, through the frame delay filter. However, it's not very convenient to use this method in the development, since you don't know if the camera image matches the game content before running the composition application. And it's not easy to have the camera frame be lit by in-game lights. It doesn't support virtual green screen too. It's also very difficult to handle complex, transparent objects when they are on the foreground. And the last is the sandwich composition. Sandwich composition is a mix of the external and the direct composition. The real world is split to foreground and background. An in-game compositor will take those images and insert the camera frame to the middle, just like a sandwich, and get the final result. Like direct composition, the sandwich composition is also working inside the game engine. It has a live preview, and it also supports the virtual green screen and the dynamic relighting. But essentially, it works in the same way as the internal composition. The most advantage of this method is that it supports the image-based latency synchronization. It could buffer the past foreground and the background images before compositing this with the camera frame to match the camera latency. However, just like the internal composition, complex transparency on the foreground might not be handled correctly. And it's only available on Unity right now. We are working on bringing it to Unreal 4 at a later time. So, which composition mode should I use? In general, we should start from the direct or sandwich composition. They are convenient and works in most of the common situations. If there are special needs, switch to external composition. Virtual green screen is very valuable in reducing the green screen coverage and provides more freedom in the camera movement. If we want to freely move camera to anywhere, this is the ideal green screen room. Could it be feasible? I guess not for many of us. How could we make perfect video when we don't have the full green screen coverage? We created the virtual green system to solve the problem. The guarding system defines the playable boundary, and because the player would only play inside the boundary, for any area which is not covered by the boundary, we treat them as a virtual green screen. We can say we only need to keep the minimum amount of the physical green screen when the virtual green screen is used. Here is a footage without virtual green screen. The picture on the corner is where the camera is. The left side of the camera view is not covered by the green screen. We can see it on the composited footage. Here is the result when we activated the virtual green screen. It looks perfect. The virtual green screen reduces the necessary green screen coverage and gives us more freedom in moving the camera. There are some big benefits in using the guarding system as a virtual green screen. The setup of the guarding system is very intuitive. Everyone can do that easily inside the Rift setup. The player could also see the boundary when he wears the headset, but the boundary is invisible to the mixed reality camera. It's perfect when you do the shooting. Here is a typical setup when we need movable camera. We set up green screen to cover a corner and the ground, and place the camera in the opposite of it. We could then find the maximum area where the camera can move freely. keep in mind, the camera rotation doesn't matter. All the surrounding areas would show the VR world when we rotate the camera, even there is no green screen. Now we talk about the dynamic relighting. Let's look at some videos. This is a video without dynamic relighting. We can see there are two lights on my hands. They impact the world, but not myself. This is with the dynamic relighting. It looks much more realistic. Dynamic relighting only works with in-game composition modes. If we do that with a regular color camera, the results could be flat. But when using a depth camera, because we now have the per pixel normal, the lighting would look much better. But keep in mind, the dynamic relighting won't work for any game. A lot of games are using static backlighting currently, and the dynamic relighting won't work in this scenario. We made great effort to minimize the latency from the rendering in Rift. But camera input usually has much higher latency than the VR world rendering. The video shows what will happen if we naively composite the game with the camera frame. The hands are lagged in the camera. It looks like I'm trying to catch the lights. That's a very bad shooting. To perfectly match the camera and the game, we need to composite the camera frame with a past game state instead of the current one. There is no silver bullet to solve this issue, but there are still a few different solutions to tackle that. The first method is image-based synchronization. It's difficult for us to revert the game to our old state. But if we render the VR world to foreground and background images, we could buffer those images and then composite the camera frame with the old foreground and background images. As we can see, it composites the current camera frame with a past game frame. The method is naturally implemented in sandwich or eternal composition and could generate perfect result in most of the situations. However, because we need to store the previous background and foreground images, it takes extra memory. And it does not work well when there is complex transparency objects on the foreground. In the pose-based synchronization, we delay the hand pose update a little bit to match the camera latency, like this. If we don't do any synchronization, the most significant problem we will notice would be the mismatch of the hand poses. Pose-based synchronization solves the problem. It works at very low cost, since we only need to buffer the past poses. And it works with any composition method. According to how the game engine handles the poses, the player and the headset might notice a delay of hand movement. The observer-based synchronization requires two computers. The person wears the headset connects to the first computer to play the game. The other computer works as the observer. It observes the VR world state on the first computer and do the direct composition with the camera input. Because there will be the network latency between the player and observer, it could be used to match the camera latency to make perfect composition. We can see the concept on this diagram. Let's take a look at the animation. It could generate ideal synchronization result, but the game must support multiplayer to make it work. Another thing I should remind us is not all the content looks equally good when capturing it with a third-person camera. Sometimes an object might be placed in the middle of the camera and the player. It blocks the view in mixed reality. Also, when there are objects following the movement of HMD, it would look very weird in the mixed reality. We will see them jumping unreasonably. According to which engine you use, there are different ways to hide those unwanted objects. And generally, the old way for treating the eyes might not work unless we could also treat the camera at the same time. Here I want to show you a nice mixed reality footage. It's made by Xiang Games.
Good to see you, Agent. We're overdue for a quick evaluation of some of your more daring accomplishments. You've managed to thwart Dr. Zor's plans multiple times, even after a few setbacks.
Laser tripped. Deploying neurotoxin. Intruder detected.
And a few more setbacks. However, you may still need to work on maintaining your composure in tight situations. Your professionalism leaves something to be desired. And maybe I put a little too much emphasis on love for danger in the job description. You've still become our most valuable agent, but I would be lying if I didn't tell you I expect you to die.
I like this guy. In conclusion, the technology is totally ready. We encourage you to start shooting mixed reality footages for your audience. And here are some tips before I finish my section. When you are standing in front of the camera, think yourself an actor or actress. You are not just playing, you are acting. The mixed reality capture is not limited to games. People use that in the training, in construction, and in a lot of different areas. We are keeping improving the technology. Please give us feedback whether you have good or bad experience. We deeply appreciate that. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, guys. So after that, I figured we'd walk you through a concrete example of an implementation of mixed reality, and we're going to use Medium for that. How many of you had the chance to see the mixed reality stuff we were running over at the booth? Okay, if you aren't raising your hand, you blew it because it's over. This talk happened to fall in the last slot. So here is, I think this was in the keynote already, but here's kind of a video of some mixed reality capture taken directly from Medium with no editing or whatever afterwards. I think Medium makes a pretty good case to talk about because it's actually a pretty difficult one. So to kind of contextualize this using the terminology that Xiang was talking about, Medium does direct composition mixed reality with a Z depth camera, an observer machine, so we use observer-based latency. I think that might be all of it. There's some reasons for these decisions. Medium is super performance heavy. You can easily make meshes that are 10 million triangles that we're throwing at the GPU. So doing it on one machine would be difficult because we don't really have the horsepower to render two entire views. Plus a Z camera actually does a bunch of stuff with the GPU using CUDA to do the depth solve. So that's why we use a second machine. The reason we use a depth camera is because, kind of like you could see, if I can get this video to replay, let's see if I can do it. The artist can put clay anywhere they want, and a single piece of clay can be both in front of and behind some of the video, so we can't just separate the scene into foreground and background very easily. Often the artist is just straight up interpenetrating the clay. A lot of the stuff we were doing at the demos, there was like, one of the artists was standing right in the center of the thing he was working on. So it's never going to look perfect in that case because it's not a thing you can really do, but we want to make it look as good as we possibly can. All right, so I'm going to talk about three things. And I should say, by the way, I'm happy to if you're implementing mixed reality stuff for your own app and you want to talk to me about any of these three categories afterwards, I'm happy to
help you. I'm just going to kind of blast through a bunch of different stuff. So the first thing I'm going to talk about how we do the physical setup of the machines. Then I'm going to talk about how we do the actual composition in the app. And then I'm going to talk about the physical setup of your space, right? Like for all the tech behind this, I think especially now that we've productized it in the SDK, the hardest thing about mixed reality is really just like setting up your space, you know, getting the wrinkles out of your green screen cloth and stuff like that. So I'm going to start with the machine setup. Medium's mixed reality implementation actually predates the SDK support for the VR object. So when we originally were using 2 machines, we actually had 2 VR rigs and we'd cross-calibrate the tracking spaces. So the VR object had made that a lot easier for us. One of the machines is the sculpting machine and one is just a slave observer. So here's kind of our hardware setup. The sculpt machine now has, we use 4 trackers so we can have a pretty big space for the camera person to walk around and the sculptor. We got the Rift and the 2 sculpting touches and the 3rd touch are all paired to that machine. And then we have a Z camera rig over on the observer machine and the Z camera plugs into the observer machine. The observer machine doesn't have a VR rig, it just runs Medium in this windowed mode that we have. Oh, and Medium's a native engine, by the way, I should mention that. We don't use the Unity or Unreal integrations. We've done all the nuts and bolts manually, but it's all pretty straightforward stuff to do. So if you have your own engine also, don't let that dissuade you. All right, as far as the data transfer, if you've used Medium, you may know we have Studio Share is a feature that lets 2 people be together in the same space. We also have a thing called VR recordings, where you can play back a recording where like the avatar appears next to you and is sculpting. We use the same tech for this. You know, if you're an engine programmer, it's just kind of serialization of entities and attributes and stuff like that, and then we blast that and the sculpt data over. Mixed reality, we have a couple extra network packets just to send the VR object state over, so the observer machine knows where the camera is. But otherwise, it's been really helpful that we've been able to piggyback off our kind of standard multiplayer tech to do this. Xiang mentioned the observer machine-based latency stuff. That is super helpful thing about having 2 machines here, right? I just got an ImGUI slider that I can drag. Turns out the Z camera is about 30 milliseconds of latency. And then all we do is we just, every time we get a network packet, we just stuff it in a queue and we don't consume it for 30 more milliseconds and everything lines up perfectly, which is really great. There's some downsides, obviously, to using 2 machines for this. Someone on my team asked me, like, if we built out a 10-core machine with 2 1080s, whether we could do it on one. We probably could. I probably will never do it because there are some upsides also. The downsides are the clay data can actually be quite large. If someone is really massing out something very large, you'll see some latency in the mixed reality view where it kind of like pops in a little bit later because I have to throttle the network bandwidth so I don't totally hose Windows. And obviously, it would be much simpler to set up a single machine install because we wouldn't have to haul 2 machines down here and get them all networked and all that kind of stuff. That said, most of what we use Medium's mixed reality for are live streams every month. And I think that's a real important distinction. If you're implementing mixed reality support in your app, knowing whether you really want to target live streamability or like, I'm going to record this asset and I can clean it up and do all sorts of processing on it and use it later. We rely on the first-person view as much as we do the mixed reality view. Our live streams are intended to be educational. We get prominent artists in there using it, and usually they're teaching a technique. Mixed reality is really great for giving people a sense of what it's like to be in virtual reality, but it's not great for showing a super close-up of some very finicky technique that someone's doing, right? So we'll often cut to the first-person view for that. The other thing is, from time to time, we experience some bugs, and it's really handy during a live stream to be able to cut to the first-person view because then nobody knows that you've turned off your microphone and rebooted the observer machine and are like quietly panicking while the sculptor keeps going. Highly recommend that if you're going to do live streams. It's really important to have that second view. All right, that's the machine setup. Now I'm going to talk about how we compose the video into the app. Here is our little demo room up in San Francisco. This is where we run our monthly artist live streams. So from the top, here's kind of our green screen space. And here's me in the space. So for starters, you just take the Z camera, you render a VR scene, we feed the Z video into the app. we compose them together and just do a depth compare, and just anything in the Z camera video that's closer than the VR scene, we render. If you do that, here's what you get. So I just drew like a donut of clay around myself to give an example of a single object that should be both in front of and behind me. There's a bunch of problems with this. Obviously, the fact that you see all the green screen is a problem. You can also see some artifacting behind my head where it's not actually a closed loop and the video is coming forward. So I'll walk you through how we get from here to the real mixed reality thing. The first thing we do is, Xiang talked about the Guardian-based kind of virtual green screen stuff that they use to clip anything outside so that you don't need the entire room blanketed in green. We do that, and we do an additional thing, which is we use the Guardian polygons to reject anything from the Z camera that's behind them, right? So we set up the Guardian boundary with, as you can see here, about a 2-foot boundary just to give the Z camera a little buffer. And then here is a visualization of that with the Guardian polygons rendered. So those green, red, and orange things are the Guardian boundary itself. What we actually do in the shader is we render those polygons. So we'll never consider any Z camera video. That's how we do the virtual green screening, because if it's not on the Guardian polygons, it just doesn't get rendered, because we're rendering literally those polygons. And in the fragment shader, every time we're considering a fragment for one of those polygons, we use the like GL frag coord X and Y to do like a screen space lookup into the Z video texture, pull that back with the depth, compare that Z video fragment to the incoming one from the Guardian polygons. If it's behind it, we throw it out. Otherwise, we put it on the screen. Which is kind of a wacky way to do it, but it's really convenient because it kind of solves a bunch of problems at once. So if you do that, here is what you get. A somewhat better version of the last thing I showed you. So there's still a lot of artifacting. Let's talk about why that is. So the Z camera, honestly, I use the Z camera because the Alchemy guys posted about their mixed reality stuff, and it's the one that they use, so I just went on Amazon and bought it. It also, I think the reason a lot of us use it is because it doesn't use any infrared stuff to do depth, which there's some concern maybe it interferes with VR tracking systems. So the Z camera uses 2 color cameras that are offset to solve for depth, which means that, if you look at this particular illustration, there's kind of a halo around me. If you have like a really close object and then really far away thing right next to it, there's this kind of halo where only one of the cameras can see you. And so it kind of looks like that. So that's what you get back for depth from the Z camera. Z SDK also will give you a confidence map back, and it will correctly tell you that those like kind of stretchy, weird halo areas are very low confidence. But that doesn't help you, because the fact that it's low confidence doesn't mean you can automatically assume it's far away. Like it might be just in the shadow, like it might still be my arm, and if you throw it out, you're going to get artifacts. So you can kind of understand based on that last screenshot, when you look at this, right, like that halo kind of spreading back away from me is cutting out some of that donut and then leaving even more of the green screen behind me. So unfortunately, I had these kind of dreams of being able to just do mixed reality with no green screen in the background whatsoever based on the depth. Does not work out, and you have to do Chroma Keying. So we added some Chroma Keying to the shader that blends in the Z video stuff, and you get the thing that you actually want. One more note on why you have to do Chroma Keying is the ground. Right? The ground is one place that you are in direct contact with the green screen. And I've turned off the Chroma Keying for this screenshot, so you can see the quality of the depth information you get back is a little bit choppy. So there's really no way to use the depth to reject the green screen without essentially taking you off at the shins. I should also say, by the way, the Z camera is awesome, and we love using it, and we are putting it for a camera that uses color imagery to solve for depth. We are giving it literally the worst possible situation by trying to create an environment where it is a featureless, flat, green background. It is like a miracle that it gives us back depth as good as it does, but we are definitely not making its life easy. Our Chroma Keying, I wish I could tell you we have some really elegant solution. What we have is a shader that we continued adding things to until there was no green left. So we have parameters called things like tolerance A and then tolerance B. In my dreams, where I have a lot of free time, I want to do a thing where you can pause the app and use like a little eyedropper against pixels and be like, pick a green pixel, and then set H, S, and V ranges and add it to like a list that get rejected. So you could, that would be really helpful. For example, down at Facebook Menlo Park, they have like a blue screen room. We just couldn't do that at all because our shader is super specific about rejecting green, right? I probably won't ever do that. But if you're just getting started, maybe you can do better than I did and do it right the first time. Here's a few miscellaneous details that I thought were useful, but I couldn't figure out any other good place to put. Back in this shot, you'll notice that orange cap ceiling. And if you've used the Guardian system before, you may remember that it did not ask you to specify a ceiling height. While the floor rejection can't be done with the polygons very easily, ceiling rejection actually works pretty well. This is really handy because you usually don't drape your ceiling. If you go over and look at the mixed reality booth, the ceiling is like all this rigging and lights and all this kind of stuff. It's really helpful. You need enough clearance, right? Like if you have someone super tall on a really low ceiling, it's hard to get this to work. But generally speaking, we have enough of a buffer that we can just throw that polygon in there. I have another ImGUI slider here you can kind of see, so I just kind of tweak it whenever I get to an install. Get the ceiling set to the right height so you're not cutting off the artist's head, but you don't see anything in the ceiling, and you're good to go. All right, and the next, because the VR object is tracked on the host machine, you know where the camera is. So in Medium, we have this adorable little camera mesh that we put there so that the artist, kind of to Xiang's point about relating to yourself as a performer when you're doing a mixed reality capture, it's really handy to have that thing. So it's like artists can kind of look around and be like, oh, and they show a piece of artwork right to the camera, right? They can kind of point it towards it. If we did a one machine solution, probably the thing I would do is actually render a quad with the fully composited mixed reality video on it, so they could just look over and see exactly how they're framed. We don't currently send any data back from the observer machine to the host machine, and we have to like stream a video back over it. So again, I'm probably not going to get around to doing that, but this is really effective. All right, this last part's pretty short, but like I said, is actually the bulk of the effort involved in getting a mixed reality setup working, which is just the stuff that you use. So the Medium team, while we are part of Facebook, we're in this little satellite office, and we try to really act more like a startup team and be pretty scrappy. So you can do this on a tight budget because we did it on a tight budget. Everything you see there, I just bought off Amazon. You just kind of go on there and search for, like chroma green sheet, chroma green gaffer's tape. Those light boxes are like CFLs. I think all 4 of those was like $250 total for everything. The camera rig is prosumer stuff that I got off Amazon. It's not a Steadicam rig, but it's counterweighted and it's pretty comfortable, hold for a while. It's not in that screenshot, but we have a field monitor on there that we actually split the composited mixed reality view to, so the camera person can just look and see exactly how it's framed, which is pretty helpful. I think the whole thing, including the Z camera, which itself is like $500, was less than $2,000, right? And that's with like, what else did I forget? There's like tripod clamps that I just clamp to the joists in the ceiling to drop the trackers from. Like we tried to do all of this quite efficiently. So if you're curious, bug me afterwards if you're going to do your own setup, and I can literally just send you. I have like links for all of the stuff that I bought. May not be relevant, like if your joists are wider than mine, you might need different clamps, but it should be helpful. Let's see. Right, and then that's about it, right? We tried not to spend a lot of money on this. There are things we aren't doing yet. We don't do the dynamic relighting to some extent because Medium's lighting environment is usually pretty neutral. And when it's not, there's a spotlight that's like a projected texture, and I worry that you get some artifacting against the depth. So we haven't tried to do that. But otherwise, we've been running these live streams every month. If you go to the Facebook page for Oculus Medium, we post about them every month. And like the camera operator is just like whoever happens to be in the office. Like we've managed to do this stuff on really pretty low budget and pretty low expertise. So I would encourage anyone, like even if you're a super scrappy indie, I think it's a really good way to promote your title. And like we are living proof that you can do it without really sinking thousands and thousands of dollars and having to hire super professional people to do it. All right. That's all I got. Like I said, feel free to bug me about this stuff afterwards. I'm happy to talk about it, happy to help people with it. But we got just a couple minutes left for Q&A. I think we got a microphone right there if anyone has any questions.